Hi, I'm David Reynolds, the Chief Digital Officer at OASIS Group. Thank you for joining the first session in our three-part series on unlocking value of information. So today, the topic is something that I'm really passionate about. It's about siloed record environments and the hidden risk, the cost, and what we can do to connect physical and digital records more intelligently. This isn't just about theory, it's about giving practical ways to rethink how your organization handles information, builds trust, and reduces governance overhead. So we're operating in a very different world from 10 years ago. Information is no longer just archived for compliance. It's a leveler for performance, insight, and business decision making. But here's the challenge. Even as we go digital, many organizations still operate in a fragmented and siloed way. Physical records are managed in one way and digital records in another. And no one really has full visibility. The result of this is slower processes, duplicated effort, audit exposure, and rising cost. So today is really about addressing that fragmentation and building a more integrated foundation for governance. So when you hear me talk about silos, it's tempting to just think about the system, but the reality is these silos come in many different forms. You've clearly got the system silos, where records are stored in different platforms with often very little interoperability. One system not talking to another, not knowing what's in another system. And then there's the format. So clearly physical and digital are quite often treated as entirely separate, with separate rules and separate processes. There's quite often functional silos. So what happens in one department isn't necessarily aligned with another. That could be anything from compliance, IT, operations, working to different standards quite often. And finally, the mindset silos. So where outdated habits and we've always done it that way can get in the way, and that thinking can be quite persistent. So to solve these problems, we have to recognize that they exist and have to recognize all four, not just one in isolation. And silos create more than inefficiency. They introduce risk. The cost of these silos is really significant. Quite often you end up with redundant, outdated, and trivial data, which could be as much as 80% of all of the unstructured information that you have. So that rot data is quite often, as I say, 80% of unstructured information in many organizations. Now, that clogs up these systems, it clouds decision making, and it creates compliance gaps. And you end up with duplicate effort, inconsistent retention, inconsistent policy, and real audit exposure. And all of this adds to the wasted time, rising cost, and often lost confidence in the information that you're trying to rely on to run your business. Not all silos are equal though, and how you deal with them are not all equal as well. So we like to look at this matrix. Not all of them are easy to fix, but not all of them are hard to fix either. This matrix is quite a helpful way to think about where to start. So if you look at that top left, you've got some high value, low effort fixes. like aligning your meta information across systems or standardizing retention schedules across both physical and digital. The items on the right are definitely more structural and quite often strategic, from changing team behaviors to redesigning systems and workflows, but these are critical and often really strategic to the future of a business. I think the key message here is you don't have to solve all of this, and you definitely don't have to solve it all at once. So start where you can create the most visible value fastest. One of the biggest barriers in the records management industry is the integration of physical and digital and how we categorize these records. Physical over here, digital over there, different teams, different systems, different rules. If you was a customer experience department, you wouldn't design a customer experience that ignores half of your data or half of your clients or customers. So why do we accept it in information governance? The reality is that records are records. They're information assets. What matters is their accuracy, their accessibility, and their traceability. Whether it's a scanned invoice or a digital native contract, your organization is accountable for both. Clients and regulators really don't care about the format. They care about control and you being able to demonstrate that you have control. So what does good integration actually look like in practice? So we like to look at it through 3 layers of integration. First, there's policy. So this is about consistent retention. This is about access policies across formats. This is about ensuring that there are a set of rules that can be well understood by everybody. The second is access. So this is access integration, giving users one view of the record or records, whether they be digital or still stored physically. And third is workflow integration. For example, things like scan on demand or hybrid processes that combine digital inputs with physical archive. When these 3 layers work together, the benefits can become really measurable. You get faster access to information, you lower your risk, and quite often you can see a reduction in governance overhead. And Gartner have reported that you could expect to see as much as 20% cut in compliance effort when you conform to this. Now at OASIS Group, our approach is built around this principle of unifying governance. And one of the ways in which we do this is with FileSmart. It's our solution that brings together physical and digital records in one interface and one environment. So FileSmart helps clients search across both formats. Why have multiple systems that are trying to achieve the same goal? You can apply the same meta information standards, audit access with ease. It's built to reduce duplication. It's built to reduce rot. It's built to enable an organization to have access to everything they need to support compliance, but more important than that, in a really, really scalable way. It's the kind of capability that helps you move from reactive compliance to proactive insight. That's really what clients and regulators now expect. It's not about replacing everything that you have. It's not about a brand new system that needs to be set up in isolation in another silo. It's about bringing coherence and control to what you already do. Now, in our second part of the webinar, we will be talking to this point in more detail, and we will explain the technology behind this and why it's innovative and it absolutely creates value for organizations today. Now, if I look at one of my lines that I keep coming back to, innovation fails without governance, and governance fails without clean, trusted data. As I say, it's a line that I keep coming back to because it's quite easy to forget that in the race to digitize and automate absolutely everything, it doesn't matter how clever your tech is. If your information is untrusted or your process is opaque, then you're just accelerating quite often more noise and more mess. But in the second part, it's just as important that governance fails without clean, trusted data. You can have all of the policy in the world, but if your data is fragmented, duplicated, or hidden across systems, you'll really struggle to enforce it. That's why a unified governance environment matters. It's not just about compliance. It's really about setting a foundation for every digital initiative your organization is trying to pursue. So start with that in mind, and I'm going to talk to how you can actually do this and some steps to creating that solid foundation. So getting really practical here. Here are 3 things you can do in the next few months without any major investment. The first is a diagnostic. Diagnose. Pick a really important document type in your organization. Now, for every organization, that'll be different, and every stakeholder, it will be different. But that could be contracts. It could be HR files. It could be supplier agreements. And just trace how it's managed today. Look at the life cycle of that document. Understand where it goes, what happens to it, and map it out. Secondly, simplify. So strip out any duplicate effort. One tip, if it's being stored more than once, managed twice, then it's a red flag. Question that. Understand why that's in place. And then third, there are really smart ways to connect. So what I mean by this is, test a shared, for example, data model or life cycle approach across both formats, a document that may live in the physical and digital environments. That's really your first step towards unified governance. So this doesn't have to be big bang. In fact, it shouldn't be. Start with one pilot area. So it could be, for example, a client onboarding workflow or your HR archive. Bring together multiple perspectives, your IT, the records and operations, and really define some key metrics that might be anything from speed to access, the risk exposure, or the service cost. Measure the change, refine, and then scale. We've seen clients do this with contracts, and in addition to our FileSmart solution, we've seen clients take physical contracts to digital and digital native contracts and make them accessible in such a way that was never feasible before. And with the right technology in place, you can also interrogate these things far more efficiently and effectively than ever before. You don't need to hire a large number of people to be able to interrogate information that quite often can be exposed through more advanced modern techniques using technology. So the key here is silos aren't just inefficient. They really are expensive and they really are risky. The biggest risk right now is not doing anything. Silos don't stay still. Quite often they get deeper costlier, and, well, more exposed over time. We believe that now's a great opportunity to break down some of those silos, and it's one of the fundamental foundations for helping organizations. Now, integration doesn't mean replacing absolutely everything. It means building better bridges between what you already have. And as you probably have realized, at OASIS, we see physical and digital records as a single ecosystem. And a unified governance approach is really how you get ahead of regulation, of cost, and of risk. It really should start with something fairly simple, not complexity. So we're going to have 2 more webinars on this topic. The next one, as I say, is all about how we move from integration to technology. We'll explore how to make tools like AI and search and automated and RPA deliver actual value, not complexity. The topic of our next webinar is smart, simple, pragmatic, and we'd absolutely love you to join for the next conversation. So thank you for watching, and if you would like more information, feel free to connect with myself or anyone on the team, and we'd love to tell you more. Thank you very much.